What's going on, you guys? Paul here with Paul's Performance, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys how and giving you a little bit more insights on why, but mostly how to install a EGT gauge onto a 6-liter Powerstroke. Going to be pretty similar across any truck, but this one in particular is going on a 6.0. So for those of you 6.0 guys, you'll see exactly how to install one on your own truck, but it's going to be very similar on every other truck. So anyways, we're going to get over here to the table. I'm going to show you guys what all we got for this truck, what all comes in the kit. For this, we are using a GlowShift EGT gauge. So we're going to go over here to the table and I'm going to explain to you everything we got and what we need. So obviously the first thing you're going to need is going to be your EGT gauge. We went with the GlowShift EGT gauge and all of their components. So when you order the gauge, inside the box you're going to get the gauge itself. You're going to get a bag with some different regular kind of like bracket mounts if you want to do it that way, but we're not using that. It's going to come with the harness to plug into the back of the gauge so that you can wire up the lighting for the gauge. It's going to come with the EGT sensor gauge port here, and then it's also going to come with the other harness that connects to the EGT sensor. So that's all that's going to come in the box for the sensor. One other thing we got was this single port gauge pillar in the tan, because he has tan interior and we're only putting a single gauge in there, so we didn't want to buy the 3 or 4 gauge pillar. He's only doing this one gauge, so no need for that. So we did get the single gauge. This is from GlowShift as well. I like that they make it with the same color as the interior. And then the other thing that we got, which is also from GlowShift, the 1/8 inch NPT drill bit and tap. This comes from GlowShift as well. You don't have to get it from GlowShift, but they do sell it with the drill bit and the tap, because you are going to have to drill into the manifolds unless you have an aftermarket setup. Stock 6.0 manifolds do not have any 1/8 inch NPT ports, so you'll have to drill and tap one on those. But if you have aftermarket ones, most likely they will already have it. If you have another vehicle, yours may have it, it may not, but either way. As far as tools go, you'll need a variety of other different tools, but some of the main things we're going to need here, we're going to need a test light or multimeter of some sort so that we can figure out where we're going to tie in our wiring for the lights. If you want them to come on with your park lights, or if you want them to come on with the key switch, that's going to be up to you, but we're going to need a test light definitely to find some sort of power source to hook up to. One other thing that's going to be a necessity is going to be a magnet when you're drilling into the manifold to tap in this 1/8 inch fitting. Once you drill the hole, there may get some shavings on the inside of the manifold, and without you taking the manifold completely off, you want to get those out of there. So once you drill the hole, you'll want to have a small magnet to stick up into there and try to retrieve any of the metal shavings that may have fell into the manifold. So you are going to need that as well. Now that we have all the parts out here, we're going to go over to the truck and we're going to start installing.
Alrighty guys, so we're starting underneath the truck. We're gonna go ahead and get the EGT probe installed. So we're on the driver's side of the truck. I'm doing driver's side because it'll be closer to where the gauge is gonna be mounted, which is on the driver's side. You can do passenger side if you want. It really doesn't matter which manifold, but the driver's side is gonna be closer, so I would just do it there. Where we're gonna mount the probe at is gonna be in this curve right here on the back side of the manifold where it connects to the Y pipe. I'm gonna find me a good spot where my drill and drill bit can get into very nicely, and then I'm gonna drill my hole. Now, one thing before you drill your hole is you're going to want to make sure that you're drilling it in a good spot to where your sensor can go. You want to try and get it as angled this way as possible. You don't really want it to be coming in straight from this way. You want to make sure that your sensor is able to thread in and not hit the other side of the manifold. And the way these 6.0 manifolds are shaped, they're going to be thicker this way than they are that way. So you want to try to get it more towards this end. That way your probe can go all the way in and it's not hitting the inside of the manifold anywhere. The closer you can get it to where it's got this long range of travel to go into, the better. We're going to get this hole drilled right quick. Alrighty, so now we got our hole drilled, and now what we're going to do is we're going to take this magnet and we're going to stick it up through there. You're going to need a smaller head magnet to go up in here to fit through this hole. So we're going to stick this up in here and try to make sure we don't have any shavings that have went into it. When you're drilling on the bottom side, luckily a lot of it's going to be pulled out, but just get your magnet up in there. Try to make sure that you get any shavings that could have made it on the inside once you broke through to the inside. You can also try to get you a vacuum cleaner and a little small hose to go up in here and try to vacuum pull it out if you want to, but this magnet tends to work pretty well as long as you have one that'll fit through there. We picked up a couple little shards. I'm going to clean those off, stick it back in there until I don't get any more metal shavings, and then once I get that, we'll move on to threading. I think we're good on that one. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna do the thread process. I'm gonna take our tap, and for me, I'm just gonna put it onto a ratchet head here, and we're gonna tap threads. And these are 1/8 inch MPT threads. So we're gonna get these tapped, and then we're gonna stick the magnet back in there again and make sure we don't have any more metal shavings. And then once we do that, then we'll install our sensor. All right, now we have our threads installed. So we're gonna do magnet, try to make sure we get any shavings that may have went in from the thread process. And then once we have all those out, like I said, run it in there a few times, clean off the magnet until you don't really get any more shavings. The smaller the magnet, the better. That way you can really work it around. You can also use a vacuum or whatever to do it. Obviously, the best way would be to remove the manifold. That's just not plausible for most things. So now we have our threads, we have our hole. So now we're just ready to install the sensor. I'm gonna break our sensor mount loose, and then I'm gonna stick the sensor up in here like so. This sensor, you'll break this nut loose, and this will allow for you to turn probe in any way possible. You're going to tighten up this probe here. Once you get this probe nice and snug into the manifold, that way it's nice and tight and you get no leaks, then you can turn this right here and get it to the position you want to for routing. Right now, what I'm probably going to do is come up through floor here. Here's your shifting mechanism for the transmission, and it goes right to the side of the trans, and it goes right here up into the floorboard on the driver's side. So it's really the easiest spot to enter the truck without having to do any adding. So what I'm gonna do here is we're gonna get this sensor tightened, and then I'm just gonna route this sensor right in through the floorboard, and then we'll go inside the truck and finish up the routing. So we got our sensor tightened up. If this is getting in your way, you can also just, when you have this loosened, the sensor will pull straight out, and you can just tighten this up with a socket or whatever. But we have our sensor tightened, and then we have our sensor lock nut tightened. That way it doesn't move anymore, and it's held up in there. And as you can see, I just have it routed this way. And I'm gonna get me some zip ties and just kind of attach it to this cable here to kind of hold it in, make it look nice. And then I have it ran up through this grommet where the cable is, so it's sitting on the inside. So now we're done with the bottom side, other than me zip tying this up, and we'll move into the inside of the cab. As you can see, here's our plug-in from where we pushed it up from the bottom. That shifter cable comes up right here through the floor. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna follow that cable, because that cable is gonna come up and go up into the bottom of the dash here. So we're just gonna follow that cable. We're gonna zip tie it to the cable until it gets up into this area, and then once we get up into this area, we'll split it up. So we're going to pop this panel off here, and I'm going to run this cable, like I said, right along the existing shifter cable until I can get up into this area here. And then once I get up into this area here, we'll start working our way down. We'll get the gauge hooked up and run our wires down. So I'm gonna get this cable zip tied up, and I'm gonna get it coming out right in under the dash here. And then once I do that, we'll be right back. I ran my cable, zip tied it up to the cabling until I got under the dash. And then I have the other side of that harness plugged in. We're just gonna let that dangle in the floor now. Now I'm gonna get the pillar installed and go ahead and get the gauge installed. That way I can start figuring out how much wire I'm gonna need, and then try to tidy up the wiring afterwards. In order to get this single pillar in, when you have this handle, it's not going to go in here with the handle, so we're going to have to take the handle off to get this down in there. So we're going to go ahead and get this handle taken off here, pop these caps off. It's going to be 210 millimeters on top and bottom, so we're going to get those off, and then once we get the handle off, then we'll be able to install our gauge pillar. So now that we have our handle out of the way here, we'll be able to get our single pillar down in here. So it'll just kind of slide down in here like so over top of it. If you have one of the full pillars that goes over top of it, it'll delete this and it'll cover it up, and you'll drill holes. This one come with some push pins for you to drill holes and kind of hold it in place. But with this single pillar, you really don't need to do that, and I don't like to do that because just in case somebody ever wants to remove this pillar and the gauge, it won't have any holes in the original pillar here. And this one, once this goes back on here, this pillar is not going to go anywhere. Now the full gauge pillar that comes all the way up, that one you really don't have much of a choice because it'll kind of fall down. But with this one here, it's going to be held in super tight with being down here, and then once the handle goes on, the handle's going to hold it down too. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. But before we put the handle on, got this down in here, we're going to have to take this out a few times because now we need to get the gauge put in here. We need to get our wires ran up and plugged into the back of the gauge before we put the handle back on. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get this one plug
plug-in coming from the sensor, routed up through the dash. I like to come across and come out through this side panel here, and then once I get out, I'll pull this seal out here, and I'll just kind of run it up through here. I'll shoot it in through the back and just kind of hide it in this behind the dash on this side. Same way for the other wire that's going to be going down to the fuse panel for the lights. So I'm going to get those plugged in and get the gauge in, and then I'll show you guys how I have it kind of wired up. We have both plug-ins plugged into the back of the gauge here. The one for the lighting, which is this bigger one, and then we have the one that comes from our EGT probe. As you can see, the one from the EGT probe I have shooting down right in between this crack. There's a little rubber kind of seal that goes around the bottom of here, so I usually slide stuff up straight through there. I'm going to run this wire down through here too. The one that comes with the lighting is not very long, so you'll have to extend it to get it down to the fuse box, but I'm probably not going to go that far because I'm probably going to run this one straight to the park lights here. That way the actual illumination will not come on until the lights are on at night, along with the rest of the dash. Luckily, I won't have to run it that far. I'll just run it right here to the back of this switch, but we'll get to that here in a minute. So now that we have both of those in, I'm going to stick this other wire down between here too. And as far as this wire, I have it ran down behind this dash, and then it comes out under the dash. So now we're going to get this one push back up in here, and once we get it in here, we'll pull the wires tight and we'll hide the excess wire underneath the dash here. We got our gauge pushed in. All it does is just kind of push in with a nice little tight press fit. We got our plug-ins plugged into the back, mounted back up our grab handle here. So this is basically what it's going to look like up here. I mean, this is done. We'll pop our seal back in here shortly. I have popped out the headlight switch here, and then I have the wiring for the lights that come into the that light up the gauge and power it up. I have them right here. I'm gonna feed them off of the park lights so that when the park lights come on, the gauge will illuminate, and I'm hoping I'm gonna be able to pick up a 12-volt constant somewhere from right in this vicinity as well, just to power up the gauge, because it does have one that's gonna need 12-volt constant to power up gauge while it's running, and then you'll have the one that cuts on the backlight of the gauge whenever you want to. And like I said, for this one, we're gonna make it look factory when it comes on with the park lights and the rest of the dash. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna start cleaning up the wiring, and then we're gonna go and get this wired up to this lighting. So that's what we're gonna do next. We got our switch pulled out here. We have our wiring for our lights and to power up the gauge. In the GlowShift gauge box, you are gonna get your instructions on how to install it, and it's gonna tell you which each wire color is going to need. We have our yellow here is looking for a 12-volt constant source. Luckily, we have two 12-volt constants coming into the back of our headlight switch, so we'll hook up to those. Blue with orange stripe, and I think this brown with yellow stripe, it looks like. And then we're looking for a red is going to be 12-volt ignition switch source. Unfortunately, none of these are going to be 12-volt ignition switch, so we're going to have to look down in the dash and find a 12-volt. It shouldn't be too hard. Orange is going to be our 12-volt headlight switch source. This brown wire here is the wire, the output wire for the park light, so we're going to use that, and that's going to actually power up the lights, well, make the lights turn on. And then we're just going to be looking for a engine ground. Black wire will be a ground, or you can just find a ground somewhere in the dash, but we're probably going to tie into that. But the only thing we need to find is a 12-volt ignition source. We're just going to look. Luckily, our fuse panel is right here underneath of it, so we should be able to find one fairly easy with our test light. All you need for the test light, for example, our brown wire here, we're going to back probe in. As you can see, when I turn the switch to park lights, we get our park lights on, and our test light is on, so that's the one we're going to use for the lighting. If you come into this one right here, as you can see, the key's off, and I have 12 volts. Even with the key switch on, it stays on. Same way with this other wire, so we can just choose one of those to be our 12-volt constant. And then for the ground, you can just put your test lead to power and make sure that this is a ground, which I already know it's a ground, so I'm not going to do that, but make sure you got a good ground. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get all of these, we're going to go ahead and get these spliced in to this wire in here, and then we're going to go search for our 12-volt ignition after we get these wired in. We got all our wiring done here. We tied in to the back, so we hooked up to the park lights for the light hookup, which was the orange wire. We have a 12-volt constant, which we hooked up, which was the yellow wire here, and then we hooked up our ground as well to the headlight switch. Now we didn't have a 12-volt ignition power, so what we had to do was we had to run one. So what I did is I have this 4-wire shielded cable that I ran and I tied in down below the dash into the actual ignition wire. That way for one, I could hook this switch up, but now also I have these 3 other ignition powers here that for anything future that this guy wants to add on, or I add on to his truck, I'll already have this ignition wires here. So I have those, and I have those covered up here. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clean up all this wiring down here under the dash, get it zip tied up and looking nice. We're gonna put our switches back in, and then that'll be it for the installation. Then all we'll have to do is make sure that the gauge is working properly, take it for a test drive, see what kind of temperatures we're getting, because this truck just did get tuned with Gearhead tunes. This has an extreme tune on it right now from Gearhead, plus it has a Power Hungry Performance Fickum tune on it. Don't worry, you guys, I have already done everything to this truck. It's already O-ringed and studded, so it's ready for this. So we're gonna see what kind of EGTs we're turning to. I'm gonna get this back together and then we'll take it for a test drive. We're done with the install. We cleaned up our wire and put our lower piece of dash back in. Like I said, everything is complete. As you can see, we have it mounted up here. The lights are on and the gauge is reading. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna take it for a test drive and make sure that our gauge is moving once the truck starts to get fully heated up. And we're also going to monitor and see what the current temperatures are of this truck with the new tuning on it. Anytime that anybody gets a truck and starts tuning it up, when it comes to diesels, I always tell them that you need to have at least an EGT gauge, because you need to know what your EGTs are doing. And it's really a good thing to have for just about any diesel truck. I mean, it wouldn't hurt to have it on a stock truck, because if something is wrong with the truck and the EGTs are skyrocketing, you'll know about it having the gauge. But especially with hot tunes and throwing a lot more fuel at the engine, you really want to monitor your EGTs. So if you're towing heavy and you have a tune, you want to make sure you monitor those EGTs to make sure that you don't end up roasting out your turbo. So I highly recommend to anybody who tunes their truck, or I mean even stock, to have an EGT gauge, but especially with a tune, I tell them, in order for me to install a tune, I really would prefer to install EGT gauge. We did do Fickum tuning on this truck initially when I did the heads, and we didn't put the EGT gauge on. I just told him that he needed to get it. Once we just did the Gearhead tunes, I told him, I was like, we really need to get one in there. That way you can monitor your EGTs. So what you're looking for on EGTs, really on any vehicle, some of them vary in temperature, but if you look at the gauge, it only goes up to 1500. So if your gauge is maxing out at 1500, you are way too hot. So when it comes to a 6-liter, you don't really want to be running 1400 degrees constant. You really don't want to be that hot. Now, as far as temperatures, they're going to fluctuate. So when you're on a hot tune and you straight up floor it, you're going to see the temperature rise. Now, if it rises up to 13 or 1400 when you smack it and then you let off and it goes back down, that's fine. But what you don't want to see is 1400 plus in temperature for a long period of time. You really don't want to see 1300 for a long period of time. You really want to stay lower most of the time. And then, like I said, if you come close to that temperature, it's okay, but you don't want to be in that temperature for a long period of time, because that will cause failures within the engine. Usually it's turbos. Right now we're sitting at about 300 at idle. Our engine temperature is at about 160, so it's not fully up to temp, but we are on our extreme hot tune, which is the hottest tune that we got for this truck. So I want to test it out that way to see what we're doing. So now we're going to take it for a drive, get it up to full temp, and we're going to see what the highest temperature we get up to once we get to where we can give it a wide open throttle pull. If you look at the gauge now as we're pulling off and I'm going up this hill and accelerating, the temperature is starting to rise, which is what it should do. The EGT is going to rise with throttle, because like I said, it's reading your exhaust temperature. The more throttle you're giving it, the hotter it's going to get. Right now at cruising, we kind of maxed out right about the 1000, which is good. So we're still not up to temp yet, so we're going to get it up to full temp, and then once we get it up to temp, we'll do some hard pulls to see where our temperature goes. Right now it looks like we've kind of maxed out between the 900 to 1000 at a good cruise speed, right at about 2000 RPM. We're cruising down the highway now. We're at full operating temp on this truck right now, which is 190. Cruising at about 75, a little over 2000 RPM, and our temperature is sitting right at about a little under the 900 mark. Like I said, which for 75 and over 2000 RPM is fine, especially for a hot tune like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a couple hard pulls and see what our temperature rises up to. So I'm going to get Samuel to kind of zoom in, and then we'll see what happens on our hard pulls. Right now we're sitting at about 800, and we're going to give it a hard pull. So as you can see, she's climbing, she's going up, she's is at about 1,300, 1,400, and it looks like it topped out at about 1,400, and then like I said, I let off. That right there is perfectly fine because, for one, you're not going to be at wide open throttle on a hot tune for 45 minutes straight. If you are, something is wrong. You should not be doing that. So like I said, most of the time when you give a hard pull like that, it's going to go up, but as you can see, it's already back down at 900. So it seems like I said, this one does get a little hot, but I mean, it is an extreme tune, so I would expect it to get up that hot when I put it to the floor, but it didn't stay there for a long period of time. Like I said, the temperature, you don't want to get it up to, you know, above 1,400 for a long time, but for a few seconds, which is what's going to happen when you floor it, is fine. So it looks like we're in good shape for this truck as far as running in this tune. This is the hottest tune that he's going to have, and he's not going to run this all the time. This is an extreme race tune, so it's not like he's going to be in this tune all the time. He's probably going to be in tow tune because he tows a trailer, or he's going to be in the street tunes. I know those will not be as hot as this one because, like I said, this one is the most, you know, the hottest tune that he has. It looks like all is well. The gauge seems to be working perfectly, and that's it for the gauge, and that's how you install it, and that's what you're looking for when you have a gauge. Why I like to install EGT gauges on my diesels, and why I tell people they need one, especially with a tune. So we're going to drive this back, and then, like I said, we'll wrap up the video. So that concludes the installation of the EGT gauge on the 6-liter Powerstroke. It's really not that hard of an install, as you can see. I know the video may make it seem a little bit longer, but to be honest, if you're doing this on your own, you could probably do this in an hour, especially depending on skills and stuff. Obviously, the time will change and tools that you have access to. It's 100% worth it to be able to monitor what your engine is doing, because like I said, if there is something wrong, your EGTs can go up, as well as if you're running too hot of a tune, your EGTs can be riding a little high. So it's definitely a lifesaver. It's like 130 bucks for the EGT gauge by itself. Pillar, I think, is like another $30 or so for that. So it's really not a super expensive add-on to the truck. It could save you a lot of money because if you burn your turbo up for EGTs being too high, a turbo is a whole lot more than just, you know, less than $200 for an EGT gauge. I recommend anyone with a diesel to at least have an EGT gauge just to keep an eye on temperatures. There's a lot of other temperatures I like people to keep an eye on, oil temp, coolant temp, but EGT is a big one for diesels, especially if you have a tune. But anyways, we're gonna get inside the truck and kind of show you the finished product. That way some of you guys can see a little bit more up close of what this looks like with the GlowShift single pod, all, you know, cleaned up. As always, I appreciate you guys watching. If you have any questions about this install on this truck or how to do it, leave a comment. I'll try to get back to you as quickly as possible. And like I said, I appreciate you guys, subscribers that are already out there. We have made it over 1,000, so I really do appreciate you guys. Didn't think we'd get this far. As always, please like and subscribe, and see you guys in the next one.